I have 4 great-grandchildren. They're terrific kids. And I got thinking, watching them, what kind of a world are they going to inherit? And I got thinking, you know, I've had a lot of experience in domestic matters and international matters. And why don't I reflect on that experience and write down what I think I've learned? And if it's of use and interesting to people, maybe it can help make a little better world for these 4 kids. Well, I think you have to start by trying to define what is our challenge right now. Let me put it in perspective. At the end of World War II, people looked back, and what did they see? They saw 2 world wars. 70 million people were killed in the Second World War. They saw the Great Depression. They saw the protectionism and currency manipulation that aggravated it. They saw the Holocaust. They said, what a crummy world. And we are part of it, whether we like it or not. So they set out to do something better. Then along came the Soviet Union with its aggressive posture. So ideas came forward, and gradually, over a period of time, on a kind of a nonpartisan basis, there was built a security and economic commons. The United States took the lead in putting it together, but we rallied others, and everybody benefited from that commons. Now what's happening? That commons is falling apart because we confront a world awash in change. So we've got to come to grips with this. And there's nobody in the world that will take the lead if the United States doesn't. We can't just be spectators because, just as before, if it's a crummy world, we're part of it, whether we like it or not, it'll affect us. Right now, we have a crisis in our governance. The problems are daunting, so you need the A-team. We have a process of bringing people into the political appointments that are there that turns people off. Why don't we do it like we used to do it? That is, you make an FBI, IRS check. You check out conflicts of interest. You say to people, look, if you got a lot of skeletons in your closet, don't come. And then bring people in and trust them. Right now, we're not getting the A-team, and it's hard to get people in office. The result is there are a lot of guys in the White House now working with the president on policy. It's becoming more and more White House-centric. Those people don't stand for confirmation. They don't be called to testify. So it's almost like an unconstitutional process going on. So that's number one. There are a lot of other things we could do. Then we have another thing that's happened. The number of layers in a typical cabinet department have gone up by about 2.5 times in the last 50 years. And the number of people at each layer has gone up by about 10 times. So the people in charge are way away from the people down here where the action is. They don't know what's going on. So let's look at this and collapse it a little bit. I might say we haven't had a real budget in about 4 years. Let's get to the budget process. Actually, that process is one where people come and they argue about priorities. And for the most part, there's not much partisan content in a lot of it. So you learn to get into a problem-solving frame of mind. And that's the frame of mind you have to get to if you're going to be successful. Our economy now is sort of waiting to burst forward, but it's being held back by sort of temporary measures that are being applied all the time. I remember when Ronald Reagan took office, we had a mess on our hands. High inflation, lackluster economy. What happened? We put into place policies consistent with expansion without inflation and left them there. We put into place sensible regulatory arrangements and left them there. This is the playing field. You establish a playing field that makes sense, that's encouraging, and you leave it there and let people know and be certain this is the playing field. It's just as though you're going to go out and play football with another team. You like to know the rules ahead of time. They're not going to get 6 downs and you get 4. They're not going to change the rules in the middle of the game. That's the way that you play that game, and that's the way we've got to set up the economy. We in the United States, and broadly in the world, are on the cusp of a revolution in energy. We just have to handle it right, and we can get there. There are 2 big parts to it. Number 1, the fracking technology, which has emerged out of an interactive process between R&D and practical people, knowledgeable people, has revolutionized the availability of natural gas in this country and also crude oil. It can be applied elsewhere. We have to find the right regulatory framework so that it will take place without environmental catastrophes. And that can be done. The problems are known, the solutions are known. So that's number 1. Number 2, in the longer run, we have to create cleaner energy. And that is going to emerge from the R&D that's taking place at places like Stanford, like MIT. I'm familiar with those. But people are working on alternative energies, on saving energy, and they're really getting somewhere. So we've got to keep that going. Now, among the things we need to do are, number 1, create a level playing field. So different kinds of energy compete with each other equally. Or do we have one now? No. Some forms of energy put out a lot of pollution that affects the air we breathe, that affects the climate we create. They don't bear those costs. We should arrange something that causes them to bear the costs so that they compete on an equal basis. My own suggestion with my friend Gary Becker from the University of Chicago is to use a revenue-neutral carbon tax. But there are other ways. Then I think we should have reasonable government support for energy R&D, and so that these efforts that are going on now don't stop. And at least the experience that I'm familiar with is that when there's sensible government R&D support, it attracts industry support. And that puts you in a position where if somebody has a great idea, there are people around who know how to commercialize it and scale it. And that's the way it works. Back around 1970, as director of the budget, I was riding up to Camp David with my friend, the late Senator Pat Moynihan. He was a counselor in the White House, and a self-appointed drug czar whose job was to try to keep drugs out of this country as a way of suppressing use. I'm studying my notes because I have to make a presentation. Pat's in a state of exuberance. He says, "Shultz, don't you realize we just had the biggest drug bust in history?" I said, "Great work." "Don't you realize this was in Marseille? We've broken the French connection." That was the source. I said, "Great work." Then he paused. Then he said, "Shultz, I suppose you think that as long as there is a large, profitable demand for drugs in this country, there will be a supply." I said to him, "Moynihan, there's hope for you. This business of trying to curtail use of drugs by restricting supply has not worked. We've had 40 years, it doesn't work." It's also true that the taking of drugs in the United States is high by international standards. So we don't have a policy that's gotten at drug use. I think it's very important to try to persuade people not to take drugs from their standpoint and society's standpoint. And what we're doing now simply hasn't worked. We're filling up the jails with people, and we create huge profits, which then wind up creating violence in places like Mexico and Guatemala, making those countries hard to govern. So there are ways of doing better, and we ought to at least be willing to talk about it and not having it a taboo subject for discussion. So I'm trying to break in and say, look, let's at least talk about it. And there are ideas out there. When I was in boot camp in the Marine Corps, just at the start of World War II, I remember the day the sergeant handed me my rifle. He said, take good care of this rifle, this is your best friend. And remember one thing, never point this rifle at anybody unless you're willing to pull the trigger. No empty threats. Create a situation where people know when you say something, you mean it. There's going to be follow-through. So that was one of the principles that we laid down and President Reagan tried to abide by and did abide by. So here are the principles that I think need to govern. Number one, be realistic. Don't kid yourself. No rose-colored glasses. Also, don't forget there are opportunities out there. Look at them. But reality is the first thing. Number two, be strong. Be strong militarily, but also economically. And most important, be strong in your sense of confidence and willpower. Then number three, have an agenda. You know what you're trying to achieve. So you have a U.S. agenda, and then on the basis of reality and strength and your agenda, you engage. We engaged with the Soviet Union, and people said, gosh, why are you doing that? And Ronald Reagan said, look, they don't have any, it's no mystery what I think. I've called them an evil empire. That's reality. So those are the principles that should guide our diplomacy. We have to remember that nuclear weapons exist in an environment. And we need to work kind of interactively on the environment and our efforts to reduce nuclear weapons. People have known from the beginning that nuclear weapons are really dangerous. The consequences of their use, even one, let alone multiple use, are almost unimaginable. So we need to do something about it. As the Cold War gradually went down, we were able to make reductions. They're about 30% today of what they were at the height in 1986 when President Reagan and I met with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze and Reykjavik. So we need to keep working at it. I've been privileged to be working here at Stanford with others and also with Sam Nunn and Henry Kissinger. And we've made headway in getting people to identify steps that need to be taken. And progress is being made, but I think now we have to reestablish the right kind of atmosphere. The world is changing rapidly, and we've got to come to grips with that. And in that environment, I think we'll be able to do things like get better control of fissile material, like get people to stop making weapons-grade uranium, and so on. And so we need to keep working at it, and we are. And here at the Hoover Institution in Stanford, we've been making huge efforts in that direction. We need to be responsible to the generations that are coming. What kind of a world are they going to inherit? Can we construct a world that has a certain semblance of stability to it? Can we construct a world where nuclear weapons are not a threat? Can we construct a world where we have secure energy? We know how to get at these things, and we need to be rolling up our sleeves and doing it. And I think we have to realize, whether we like it or not, in the United States, we're part of whatever emerges in the world. So we need to do something about it, and we can. We have in the past. And we need to get up, stand tall, figure out what we're in favor of, and work for it. That doesn't mean other people are going to do whatever we say, but if we're there as a player, and we have ideas, and we're going to work with others, gradually we will reconstruct the security and economic commons that has served us so well in the past. That's where our future needs to be.